infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, hey, everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to today's show. Now, pertussis, or whooping cough cases, have been on the rise in many places in the world this year, and the Philippines is one of those countries. During the first 3 months of the year, Philippines health officials have reported well over 1,100 cases, which is a more than 30-fold increase compared to the same period in 2023. In addition, more than 50 fatalities have been reported, all in very young children. So here to talk to me more about pertussis and the situation in the Philippines is Edsel Salvana, MD. Dr. Salvana is a director and professor of the Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology, the National Institutes of Health at the University of the Philippines, Manila. Dr. Salvana, welcome back to the program, sir.
Thanks for having me, Robert. It's good to be back.
Great. We've talked about pertussis on this podcast before, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but can you go ahead and give the audience an overview about pertussis or whooping cough, something about the organism and transmission and the pathology?
Right. So pertussis is actually a bacterial illness caused by a bug called Bordetella pertussis. It is a vaccine-preventable illness. It's one of the diseases that we vaccinate against in early childhood. It's called whooping cough precisely because that's how it manifests. You cough a lot usually. To the point that some people have difficulty breathing because they're coughing so much, and without treatment, this can last for weeks to months, and it's particularly dangerous in young kids who are not vaccinated because they can end up with respiratory failure and pneumonia.
So is it the young children that are most at risk for serious illness?
Right. Usually it's the young kids, especially infants, because they have very small airways. And so when they start coughing, you can have a lot of inflammation in that area, and it can close up the airway. You can also have a lot of vomiting, which can dehydrate a child very quickly, malnourish them, and also, make all sorts of electrolyte abnormalities.
Yeah. And as you said, it's a bacterial infection, so it can be treated with antibiotics.
That's right. We usually use azithromycin or Zithromax, which is the brand name. It's something that we use for both adults and children.
Right. And of course, the prevention is vaccination. While pertussis is endemic worldwide, we are seeing a rise in cases in other places around the globe. Probably the most notable one in the media right now has been Europe. And it is noted that epidemic peaks occur every 2 to 5 years. Dr. Salvana, is this what we're seeing now? And why does it present itself like this?
Right. So the pandemic actually disrupted a lot of these patterns. In the past, we did see that 2 to 5 years. And pertussis in general is really endemic in most places because the immunity from pertussis does wane. Fortunately for adults, for healthy adults, disease tends to be mild also because a lot of people have been vaccinated. During the pandemic, when people were wearing masks, weren't really going around, there was a drop in the number of cases because those things that we do to prevent COVID can also prevent pertussis because it's transmitted by respiratory droplets. And so right now, what we're really seeing is, aside from the fact that people weren't that exposed to pertussis, a lot of children actually missed their vaccinations when the lockdowns were happening.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the vaccine, because I think that has something to do with the part of the issue with this. Historically, we went from a whole cell vaccine several decades ago to an acellular vaccine. So give the audience a little bit of history. What happened here, and has it affected the spread of pertussis?
Right. So the pertussis vaccine, the wholesale pertussis vaccine, was kind of a victim of its own success. It actually worked really well with efficacy rates above 90%. But because it was the whole organism, pertussis, it actually did tend to cause more reactions. Not necessarily severe reactions, but people got fevers. There was a lot of site reactions, and when you do that on a large scale, it can be a substantial problem. And so the decision was made to use something called an acellular preparation, which actually does have the different pieces of these of the pertussis bacteria, but it is pretty much chopped up, and it tended to cause fewer reactions, less severe reactions, but at the same time, because it was less reactogenic, it was slightly less effective, from 90%, about 80% efficacious, but still very good. And we saw fewer side effects. So those are the differences between those two.
Do we see the immunity wane more because of the acellular vaccine?
That is something that has been seen in many places as well, because the whole cell vaccine actually generates better T cell responses. And although we do see T cell responses as well in the acellular, they're not as strong. And so the memory cells that you generate and the amplitude, the peak of the antibody response is not as high as that with with a whole cell vaccine.
Right. And so this is important reason for the requirement of boosters.
That's right. And aside from the fact that, aside from the boosters being something that we should really look at, it also because, as a whole, when you have slightly less effective vaccine, then we are more prone to these kinds of outbreaks, especially when, people have not been going around and the number of people who are vaccinated has actually gone down.
Yeah. Now, I read in the Philippines media recently that there's concerns of a shortage in government pentavalent vaccine supply. So I don't think that's a vaccine we do in the United States. But what can you tell us about that? Is there a shortage?
Right. So the pentavalent vaccine actually includes hepatitis B, because there's a very high rate of hepatitis B in the Philippines, about 17% of the population. And that's why we use the pentavalent vaccine. In fact, there's a hexavalent vaccine that also adds more. But the shortage actually is more because so many kids missed their regular vaccination during the pandemic. And so if you go by what the government regularly procures, there's going to be a lot of kids who missed those doses, and those weren't taken into consideration in the current year procurement, because those are based on previous numbers. And so it's not exactly a shortage, more than we need to catch up and find those kids. And of course, if you use the stock that's meant for the regular program, there will be shortages. But at this point, the Secretary of Health has actually said that they've been working hard, and they've actually gotten millions of extra vaccine doses from India.
And does the Philippines have an alternative vaccine, like one of the diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccines that we use here in the States?
Right. So, I mean, there are other manufacturers as well. The government is actually the one that drives the procurement for the expanded program of immunization, which is required for children. But for adults, there really is no program, especially for every 10-year boosters. So those are actually procured privately. And so those are subject to market forces. And also, of course, we know that there has been vaccine hesitancy in the past. And so the demand has not been that great. But of course, there's a mismatch now that there's an outbreak. Everyone wants a vaccine, and it all dries up, and it takes a while for it to catch up.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about pregnant women and this special necessary vaccination case?
Absolutely. I mean, so among the adults, the people that we prioritize are obviously the elderly, those with comorbid conditions. But pregnant women are a special case because we want to not only protect the pregnant woman from pertussis, we want to protect the infant when they are born because it usually takes vaccines about 2 weeks to kick in. But if we vaccinate mom at 27 weeks, then by the time she starts producing breast milk, there will be antibodies in that breast milk, and it can protect the infant up to 6 months. At which point, the vaccination should start to kick in.
Okay. Let's go ahead and switch gears to the situation in the Philippines today. What is the overall situation, and are there certain regions of the country that are being hit harder than others?
Right. So we're actually not just having a pertussis outbreak. We're also ending up with measles outbreaks and even diphtheria outbreaks. And this is really because of a huge part from the pandemic where there's been very little catch up. In the south, in the Bangsamoro region, they do have measles outbreaks there. Right now, I think that a lot of the places that are finding them, like in Quezon City, in Metro Manila, in Cebu, in different parts of the Philippines, those are the places that are actually capable of detecting it and they're looking for it. So I think that this is probably a bigger, more widespread outbreak, but these are the places that actually have the capability of detecting it. So I think that ultimately the solution is really to do these catch-up vaccinations, make sure that there's available treatment, as well as in those areas where the vaccination rates have really gone down. We really have to work double time to catch up with those vaccine rates.
Yeah, and how's the public health capacity there to do this?
Well, with the pandemic, I think a lot of awareness really did come from that. It's just that, as usual, as things wind down, people start to forget. But I think the infrastructure is there, and the pandemic is fresh enough in the minds of people that when there are outbreaks like these, then they do tend to start wearing their masks again, especially if they're symptomatic. They do tend to bring their kids to the pediatrician or to the health center to get vaccinated. So I think that the government is doing what it can in this situation. And it really is an unfortunate situation because it's multifactorial because of the pandemic and then there's shortages and everything. But I think we just really have to work harder in terms of trying to get these catch up and also giving the kids who do have breakthrough infections the support that they need.
All right, excellent. Dr. Salvana, let's go ahead and close with this. What advice do you have for the public in preventing disease or serious disease?
Right. I think that the biggest, most important health intervention that man has really invented is vaccination, and we're seeing these I call them ancient diseases because we've really lost our way in terms of getting to herd immunity, getting to a high level of protection when people just started forgetting about what these diseases looked like. I mean, if you read back in the 1950s, people were really scared to death of polio, and it's something that we just take for granted nowadays. Mm-hmm. I think that we really have to do a good job of educating people that thinking beyond what's in front of you, because our challenge always in public health is that those deaths that are prevented are very difficult to conceptualize from a layperson's standpoint, because out of sight, out of mind, you don't see people dying. During the pandemic, we saw people dying, and now people aren't dying anymore, and they forget very easily. So I think that it has to be a constant stream of communication from the doctors, from public health officials, and even schools. I think that we really have to give the public an idea of just how important vaccination is so that we don't get into trouble and history keeps repeating itself.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Edsel Salvana, for sharing your time and expertise with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.